Niccolo Machiavelli, the man who decoded the dark mechanics of power, discovered that mental weakness isn't a lack of strength, it's a lack of shield. He sat inside the courts of Florence. He watched diplomats and princes rise and fall. He studied their private collapses, not just their public victories, and what he found wasn't just about politics, it was about something deeper, something that lives inside all of us. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that a ruler seen as fickle, frivolous, irresolute, or pusillanimous will always be held in contempt. And contempt, he argued, was not simply dismissal. It was the specific condition that opens the door to conspiracies and the complete loss of the ability to command. A prince who is hated at least inspires a reaction. A prince who is despised has already lost the room. People do not fear overthrowing someone they do not respect. They consider it a public service. That is the difference between being disliked and being contemptible. And that difference, in Machiavelli's framework, is everything. Consider a composite portrait drawn from patterns Machiavelli observed in the Florentine courts, a profile that mirrors what he documented again and again in the corridors of power. A senior advisor to a powerful family had spent his entire career trying to make those above him happy. He changed his positions in council meetings the moment he sensed disagreement. He apologized before he even finished speaking. He watched the faces of powerful men to see which way the wind was blowing before he offered a single thought of his own. His entire identity had been handed to other people, and within 2 years, he was gone. Not because he had enemies, because the powerful people around him stopped taking him seriously. He had shown them, slowly and completely, that he had no internal anchor, that he was easy to move, that he was, in Machiavelli's word, weak. By the end of this video, you will know the 5 invisible signs of mental weakness that most people around you are showing right now. Signs that most of us mistake for kindness, for humility, for emotional sensitivity. But Machiavelli saw them clearly for what they are, and once you see them too, you will not be able to unsee them. Here is what makes Machiavelli's framework so unsettling. He was not writing about villains. He was not writing about people who are obviously broken or visibly cruel. He was writing about ordinary people, educated people. People who seem, by every surface measure, to be doing fine. The dangerous part of what Machiavelli called ozio, that quality of indolence and irresolution that he considered the true enemy of any leader, is not that it destroys people loudly. It is that it destroys them quietly, from the inside out, through patterns so normalized that most of us do not even recognize them as weakness at all. We have been taught to call these patterns sensitivity, or humility, or being a good listener. Machiavelli called them something else. He called them the open doors through which other people walk in and take what is yours: power, peace, direction, identity, not stolen in one dramatic moment, but bled out slowly through 5 specific habits you are about to recognize in sharp, uncomfortable detail. The first sign is the need for constant validation. It is the most common sign, and it is also the most dangerous because it looks like a personality trait. It looks like someone who is warm, who cares what others think, who wants to keep the peace. But Machiavelli would have recognized it immediately for what it actually is: a transfer of power. He wrote in The Prince that there is no other way to guard yourself against flattery than by making men understand that telling you the truth will not offend you. Think about what that sentence means in reverse. If a man cannot hear the truth without falling apart, he has already surrendered. He has made his inner world dependent on outside approval. Every decision he makes, every opinion he holds, every action he takes gets filtered through one question: will this make people like me? Machiavelli called this the surest path to being destroyed by others. Not because people are cruel, but because people are opportunistic. When you hand someone the keys to your emotional stability, they will eventually, even accidentally, use those keys to control you. A prince who seeks approval is not a prince at all. He is a puppet, and the hands pulling the strings are never as friendly as they appear. You can spot this sign quickly. Watch how someone reacts when they are not praised. Watch whether they need to explain themselves constantly. Watch whether they change their opinion the moment someone pushes back. These are not accidents. These are someone showing you where their weakness lives. Think about the last time you watched someone reverse a position they had held firmly, simply because one person in the room frowned. Think about the person who cannot stop talking until they are certain you approve. Think about the friend who sends multiple follow-up messages after one unanswered text, not out of urgency, but out of anxiety. Each of these behaviors is a small resignation, a small transfer of authority from the inside to the outside, and Machiavelli's point was that these small resignations compound. Over time, the person who needs constant validation becomes entirely unreadable to themselves. They no longer know what they think, because they have been waiting for someone else to tell them. They have outsourced their entire inner life, and the rent comes due every day in the form of anxiety, people-pleasing, and quiet resentment. The second sign is the lack of strategic flexibility. This one hides behind something that looks almost noble. It looks like consistency, like someone who knows what they believe, who does not bend, who stays the course. But Machiavelli had a specific framework for why this kind of rigidity destroys people. He called it the failure to be both the fox and the lion. He wrote in The Prince that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. A leader must be both. The lion uses force to deal with open enemies. The fox uses cunning to recognize traps before they close. But the leader, who is only one of these, is perpetually exposed. A person who can only respond with force has no strategy. A person who can only strategize has no spine. This was not just a military principle. It was a law of survival in any environment where other people have competing interests and are willing to act on them. The sign of weakness here is rigidity. It is the person who responds to every challenge the same way, regardless of what the challenge actually requires. They escalate when they should be cunning. They retreat into politeness when they should be firm. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Machiavelli watched this destroy capable men in Florence repeatedly, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked adaptability. Fortune, he wrote, is a violent river. It changes course. The person who cannot change with it gets swept away, not by enemies, but by their own inflexibility. The third sign is the use of victimhood as a strategy. This one is subtle, and it is perhaps the sign that Machiavelli found most interesting, because it looks like the opposite of power, but it functions as a form of it. Consider a narrative illustration based on a recurring pattern that appears throughout Machiavelli's observations of court politics. A man who could not compete directly in a power struggle would instead position himself as the one being wronged. He would not argue for what he wanted. He would make others feel guilty for not giving it to him. He would describe his own suffering with such consistent detail that eventually people would do almost anything just to make him stop. They would give him what he wanted, not because he had earned it, but because resisting him had become more exhausting than accommodating him. Machiavelli understood this pattern completely, but he did not see it as power. He saw it as borrowed strength. And borrowed strength, he believed, collapses the moment the lender stops feeling guilty. He wrote that people are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear. Someone who uses victimhood to manipulate is trying to create a third impulse, which is guilt. But guilt is unstable. It shifts. The moment people begin to feel the suffering is manufactured, or that they have been taken advantage of, they stop feeling guilty. They start feeling used. And when that happens, the victim loses everything, because they never built any real strength of their own. They only borrowed the energy of other people's compassion. The way you spot this sign is not by looking for obvious manipulation. It is by looking for patterns. Does this person always have a reason why things are not their fault? Do their problems always require someone else to solve them? Is their suffering always loud enough to demand a response? These are the signs of someone who has turned weakness into a tool, and tools eventually wear out. The fourth sign is the absence of virtù. This is perhaps Machiavelli's most important concept, and it is the one that most directly explains why some people remain stuck while others move forward. But to understand it properly, you have to understand what he was pushing against. The church and the dominant moral philosophy of his time taught that virtue meant goodness, patience, humility, and obedience to God's will. Machiavelli rejected this as a guide for leaders. He wrote that a man who acts virtuously in every way in the Christian sense will necessarily come to ruin among so many who are not virtuous. His virtù was something different. It was the quality that allowed a leader to impose his will on fortune itself. Boldness, adaptability, the willingness to do what was necessary to achieve a stable outcome, even if that meant actions a priest would condemn. Fortune, he wrote, is like a violent river. It floods and destroys when unchecked. But when it is quiet, leaders with virtù prepare and shape the terrain so that when the river rises again, it causes less damage. Virtù was the capacity to meet fate on your own terms, not wait for it to arrive on its own schedule. The absence of virtù shows up as indecision. It shows up as endless preparation without action. It shows up as the person who always has a reason why now is not the right time. They need more information. They need to wait for a better opportunity. They need to see how things develop. Machiavelli saw through every version of this pattern. He wrote that all courses of action are risky, so wisdom is not in avoiding danger, but in calculating risk and acting with decisiveness. Make mistakes of ambition, he said, not mistakes of slowness. What Machiavelli was describing was the gap between knowing and doing. The irresolute, as he would have called them, often know exactly what they should do. They understand their situation clearly, but that understanding never becomes action. It becomes analysis, and then more analysis, until the moment has passed and they can tell themselves that it simply was not meant to be. This is not thoughtfulness. It is ozio, indolence dressed up as patience. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being around someone stuck in this pattern. They talk about their plans with genuine excitement. They research, they prepare, they build elaborate frameworks for the thing they are going to do, and then they wait. They wait for certainty that never comes, because certainty is not what makes action possible. Courage is. Certainty is just a story the mind tells to justify the waiting. Machiavelli observed this pattern in the weakest princes he studied, men who had every resource and every advantage, but could not bring themselves to move without a guarantee that moving would succeed. And those men, without exception, were eventually moved by circumstances they could have shaped if they had acted sooner. Fortune did not reward their caution. It simply passed them by and handed the moment to someone bolder. You spot the absence of virtù in the person who talks about plans more than they execute them, in the person who changes direction the moment they encounter resistance, in the person who always has an explanation for why they did not move, rather than a story about where their movement took them. Fortune, Machiavelli wrote, favors the brave. It has no interest in the hesitant. The fifth sign is the habit of constant defense. This is the sign that Machiavelli considered the most revealing, and it is also the one that most people have never thought about in these terms. He made it clear in his writings that the moment a leader stoops to defend himself against every critic, he has already lost the power game, not because he is wrong, not because his critics are right, but because the act of defending communicates something that cannot be unsaid. Defense is a signal. It says, "Your opinion of me matters so much that I need to change it." It says, "I cannot simply be what I am. I need your permission to feel secure in it." And once you send that signal, you have handed something valuable to someone who may not deserve it. You have given them the ability to make you uncomfortable just by expressing doubt. Machiavelli wrote that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. But the second method, implied across his entire body of work, is to watch how the ruler responds when those men challenge him. Does he explain himself? Does he justify his choices? Does he go to great lengths to make them understand why he is not what they accuse him of? Each of these moves, however reasonable they seem, chip away at the one thing that actually creates authority, presence, groundedness, the quiet certainty of a person who knows what they are and does not need to prove it. The fickle person, the one Machiavelli described as irresolute and changeable, explains everything. Every decision, every position, every action. They live in a kind of permanent trial where the jury is everyone around them and the verdict is always pending. Machiavelli had no patience for this. He wrote explicitly that a ruler is despised when he is seen as changeable, frivolous, or pusillanimous. Defensiveness signals all of these things at once. It tells every observer in the room that this person can be destabilized with a question. The way you spot this sign is simple. Notice who, in any room, is always explaining themselves. Notice who responds to a raised eyebrow with a 5-minute speech. Notice who cannot let a criticism sit unanswered, even when answering it would do them no good. These are not confident people performing modesty. These are people who have not yet found the ground beneath their own feet. Now here is the part that matters, because we have been talking about other people. But Machiavelli was never really writing about other people. He was writing about the reader. He always was. Look at these 5 signs again from the inside. The need for constant validation, the rigidity that collapses under pressure. Victimhood used to avoid real effort, the paralysis of lacking virtù, and the endless habit of defense. Every single one of these patterns was something Machiavelli had observed repeatedly in the courts of Florence and in himself. He had been dismissed. He had been desperate. He had been exiled. He had spent time explaining himself to people who were not listening. He did not write The Prince as a self-help book. He wrote it as a technical manual on statecraft, addressed directly to Lorenzo de' Medici, the man who had the power to restore Machiavelli to political influence after his exile. It was, in the most literal sense, a job application written in the language of political science. His primary goal was national unification, a strong Italian state capable of driving out the foreign powers carving up the peninsula. Every lesson was built around that goal. And yet, the principles he laid down to describe how a prince survives in a world of competing interests apply with uncomfortable precision to how individuals lose and gain authority over their own lives today. The mechanics of power he was describing are not unique to the Renaissance. They are human. And what he observed about the men who fell, the patterns that made them contemptible and therefore replaceable, those observations are just as sharp when applied personally as when applied politically. The world responds to how you carry yourself far more than to what you deserve. You can be talented, intelligent, and right about nearly everything. But if you hand your inner peace to other people, let your emotions control you, use your suffering as a substitute for action, wait instead of move, and defend instead of simply stand, you will be seen as irresolute. And in Machiavelli's framework, being seen as irresolute and being irresolute produce the same outcome. The world responds to the signal in front of it, not the private truth behind it. This is where Machiavelli's cure begins. He called it becoming the architect of your own reality, and what he meant was direct. Stop waiting for the world to recognize your value. Start demonstrating it through action and decisiveness. Stop handing others the keys to your emotional state. Build an internal foundation that does not shake when someone pushes against it. Stop using your wounds as weapons. Use them as information instead. Let them teach you where to move more carefully, not as a reason to stay still. Stop analyzing and start executing. Fortune does not wait. The moment you are standing in right now is already leaving. And stop defending yourself to people who have already decided what they think. Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, but few experience what you really are. This is true. And it means that the only people whose perception of you actually matters are the ones who have spent enough time, close enough, to see the difference. Everyone else is working from appearance, and appearance is built through action, silence, and the kind of quiet confidence that never needed to announce itself. The transformation Machiavelli described was not about becoming cold. It was not about becoming cruel, calculating, or indifferent to others. Those are caricatures. His real message was about sovereignty, personal sovereignty, the kind that comes from a person who has looked honestly at their own weaknesses, named them without excuses, and decided to build something stronger in their place. You cannot build a fortress while you are busy defending a tent. Every moment you spend explaining yourself, seeking approval, dramatizing your suffering, or waiting for a better moment is a moment you are not building. And building is the only thing that actually changes your position in any game, personal or professional, private or public. Machiavelli's final insight, and the one that ties all 5 signs together, is that mental weakness is not a permanent condition. It is a pattern, and patterns can be broken, but they can only be broken by someone who is willing to see themselves clearly first, not with cruelty, not with shame, with the same cold honesty that Machiavelli brought to his observations of the courts of Florence, the same honesty that got him exiled and ultimately made him one of the most quoted political thinkers in human history. The world does not need more victims. It needs individuals who have looked into their own weakness and chosen to build a fortress instead. Every one of the 5 signs we covered today is a door that leads either further into dependence and fragility, or if you walk through it the other way, into something steadier, something that does not need approval to stand, something that moves instead of waits, something that acts instead of explains. Machiavelli ended The Prince with a call to action so urgent that it has lasted 500 years. He asked whether Italy had someone strong enough to take hold of the moment before it passed. Today, the question is not about Italy. It is about you. You are standing inside your own Florentine moment right now. The signs of weakness are visible if you are willing to look. The path towards strength is clear if you are willing to walk it. And walking it does not require perfection. It does not require that you eliminate every fear before you take a single step. It only requires that you begin, that you choose, starting today, to hand the keys of your inner world back to yourself, that you decide to move forward with the boldness Machiavelli spent his whole life admiring, the boldness he saw in the great princes of history, and the boldness he believed any person was capable of developing once they had the courage to stop pretending their weakness was something else. Start today. Not when conditions are perfect, not when you feel ready, not after one more plan. Today, make a decision without seeking approval for it. Let a criticism land without immediately launching into an explanation. Do the one thing you have been waiting on, the thing you already know needs doing, without preparing one more time. These are not grand gestures. These are the small acts of internal sovereignty that Machiavelli believed every person was capable of, and that most never attempt because they are waiting for permission. Because the one thing Machiavelli was most certain of across every chapter of his most famous work is that fortune does not reward the people who wait. It rewards the people who move. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.